But he says, concerning even the 10 commandments of honoring your father and mother, you'll find a way to get around that, but you better not transgress against our traditions. And that made Jesus very angry. That's not very good counsel, especially when the rest of it is not being done. You see, every new generation of youth are met with the same two challenges. We have the temptations of sin. And of course, James tells us why it's tempting to us, because we give in to our own lusts. Sometimes we feel like that they're needs, but we give into them. And secondly, there's such thing as peer pressure. Now, I will admit that when I was growing up, these were primarily the two things that I had to deal with. I had to deal with temptation, as everybody else does, and then when I'm in school, I'm dealing with peer pressure. My so-called friends, some had some friends, some proved not to be my friends because they wanted to get me to do what I knew was wrong. But it was still peer pressure. But when I consider today's youth, we have so many other things that they have to deal with. You see, some time ago, our courts in this country decided to get rid of the 10 Commandments. And that left a hole in our moral being. What am I supposed to do? We're not supposed to follow the 10 Commandments. The man came up with his own system of what we call to be politically correct. But nobody seems to understand what political correctness is, especially when you get into the business world. Because that is a different animal altogether. That can become rather vicious. In fact, my perception is that the only time you do wrong is when you get caught. If you don't get caught, then there isn't anything wrong with what you did. Now, our children have to deal with that too, along with political correctness. And all this comes about because people have turned their backs upon God and God's Word. You see, adults frequently deceive themselves by thinking that they know the best direction to go. In fact, sometimes they even try to advise their children, and they know no more than they do. And they will do it even against what God says. Now, what's coming into our society today is that it's not just people saying, well, I want to do wrong. I want to transgress God. The problem is they don't know God. They don't even know what God says. So they have no standard except themselves. And when people start setting themselves up as a standard, you know what happens to society? It becomes fragmented. People going their own way, doing their own thing. That's why we choose our friends now with those who agree with us, because I am the standard. But that doesn't last long, because then you have division among even friends, and that becomes fragmented. Do I have to say anything about what it does to marriage and the home? When this type of procedure is being followed, homes are breaking up. If you get married today, chances are that your marriage is not going to last. Even when my children were growing up, I found out then we were already in the minority, because most of the children in their schools were not living with their biological parents, that is, with both parents. It already started. Why is that? Because every person is going his or her own way. You remember that passage or passages that we have in the book of Proverbs? Here's what the wise man goes on to say to his son in chapter 14, verse 12. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is a way of death. Notice he didn't say there's a way that seems wrong to a man, and that's what he determines to do. He said, I think I'm doing right. They're trying to be good people, but they don't know what they're doing. And what do they find out? But its end is the way of death. How frustrating is that? The wise man warns his son, his young boy, Solomon, perhaps Rehoboam, who's now become king. I'm warning you, son, there is a way that seems right to people, but the end result is death. Why is that? Because we are mortal, because we are not omniscient. There's no way that any of us can really know the full consequence of any action that we follow. Well, this just didn't turn out the way I thought it would. I told this lie to get out of this situation, and now look at me. Now I've destroyed my own reputation, even with my family, with my friends. How does that make me feel? It doesn't make me feel very good. That's what happens. Now, Solomon warned his son concerning that. Do you suppose there might be some difficulty of people grasping onto that? Even children? Oh, I don't know if I believe it. Solomon says, I'm going to give it to you again. Look at chapter 16 and verse 25. Just in case you're hard-headed, you're stubborn, you won't listen to reason, you're stuck on yourself, I'm going to give it to you again. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Now you've heard it a second time. Will you remember it? You keep a diary? Put down for February 2nd, 2020, Proverbs 14 and verse 12, Proverbs 16 and verse 25, and say, I was told that, it was repeated to me, and now 5 years later, look at the mess my life is in. Write it down. Remember it. You see, Solomon loved his son. He wanted his son to know this. Now, going back to Matthew chapter 15, we notice in verse 14 that the religious leaders, those who were supposed to know God's ways, those who were supposed to be teaching God's people God's word, God's law, are substituting their own values. Verses 1 and 2, then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus, saying, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders, for they do not wash their hands when they eat bread? Didn't say, why do they transgress the law? Why do they transgress the traditions? You know there are churches out there claim to be Christian, that if there's a choice between what God's law says and the traditions of the church, you know which one they choose? The traditions of the church. because that's what they value. Then as we read on in verses 3 through 6, Jesus points out what the problem is. He answered and said to them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God? They're talking about the traditions of men. He's talking about the commandment of God. Because of your tradition. For God commanded, saying, honor your father and mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me as a gift to God, then he need not honor his father and mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. In this context, what does it mean to honor your father and your mother? Take care of them. Spend money on them. Okay? Help them out. You know what they were doing? They said, well, we're aware of this, but we're going to give it to the Lord instead. How do you think the Lord feels about that? He doesn't like that. He already told us what we're supposed to do. Take care of your father and mother. Don't shirk the responsibility. And then he goes on to tell them what is the source of the problem. Why did they do this? Why do they think this way? What is wrong with them? It all goes back to the heart. Keep this in mind. He says, hypocrites. What's a hypocrite? One who says one thing and does something else, right? So he says, hypocrites. What did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. What's far from him?
Their heart.
Their heart. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. How does that affect their worship? Even they come together on the Sabbath to worship God in the synagogue or at the temple. What does that do to their worship? Makes it vain. What does vain mean? It means it's worthless. God will not regard it. When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear and understand. Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a man. Because why is that the case? What comes out of his mouth comes from where? From his heart. There's where the problem is. Now, we have an interesting statement as we continue in verses 12 through 15. Let's look at verse 12. Then his disciples came and said to him, do you not know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard these things? Now I want you to note that the disciples are saying this. I'm going to show it to you in just a moment. It's the apostles themselves. They come to Jesus, and what are they upset about? I think he just offended the Pharisees. What should be their concern? We are offending God. You see where the peer pressure comes into here? They're instead of being concerned about their relationship with God, they're more concerned about the religious establishment, about them. And then he goes on in verse 13. But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. What is the plant? It's the traditions of men, isn't it? God didn't authorize this. If God didn't authorize it, what is he going to do with it?
Throw it out.
Uproot it. Get rid of it. And then he says, and this is so sad, he said, let them alone. Why would I say that is so sad? Their hearts are such right now that they are hopeless. This thing is going to go right on into the rest of his ministry. Just go look at Matthew chapter 23. And they're even going to call for his death. So he says, let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. They are blind leaders, and the people that they are trying to lead are blind too. They were blind before they even started leading them. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. Now, if you're a young person, maybe in high school, grade school, and you have your peers trying to get you to do what is wrong, are they even fit to lead you? Do they know any more than you do? How much more experience do they have in life than you? Have they learned from their mistakes yet? And they're going to pull you down into it? And by the way, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, sin leaves scars. You don't realize that some of the things that you may be doing now will follow you for the rest of your life. You know, companies now want to see your Facebook page and all that. And I understand, I'm not on Facebook for that very reason. But I understand whatever you post is out there forever. Is that right? It's impossible for you to erase the mistakes. You say, I wish I hadn't done that. I was reading this past week about a woman that I didn't know anything about her. It was on Wikipedia, and I was reading about her. It was one of the actors on the TV show The Waltons. One of the children, as she got older, she posed nude for Playboy. And she was talking about how much she regretted that. There's no way to erase that. It's there forever. You have a gracious God. He can forgive you. He will forgive you. But the scars remain. Somebody evidently talked her into doing that. Somebody evidently that was just as stupid as she was. I'm trying to say it nicely. The Bible calls them fools. Children need to hear this. They need to know this. And then he goes on in verses 15 and 16. The fact that they did not understand the parable. Look at verses 15 and 16. I told you, who's been concerned about this? Jesus' apostles. How do I know that? Look at the first word of verse 15. Peter. This is something that's concerning Peter. Who's Peter? One of the apostles. We know that, don't we? And so Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. So Jesus said, are you also still without understanding? What's the parable? You know, when I read this for the first time, I thought the parable had to do about, what goes into the body, coming out of the body, and all that time. That's not what the parable is. Look at Luke's account, Luke 6 and verse 39. and he spoke a parable to them. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into the ditch? What's the parable? The blind leading the blind. And Jesus says, don't you understand this? That you have blind people, people who do not know what they're doing, people who cannot see. Peter will later talk about those who are being short-sighted in 2 Peter 1. But these people are blind, so they cannot see what's coming up. And the people they're trying to lead are blind. What's going to happen to them? They're going to wander off into the ditch, aren't they? One is no help to the other. And the blind were the religious leaders, and they led the blind, those who want to follow God, but need direction and guidance. I think in the New Testament was talking about God's people, they're called sheep. Am I right? Sheep have to be led, but they got to be led by people who know what they're doing. The blind, again, were their religious leaders. And again, sin leaves scars. Jesus is going to tell us that it actually destroys the fabric of our hearts. This is really strong. Because when you're talking about the heart, you're talking about the person himself. Everything that defines that person. Let's read on. Verses 17 through 20. Jesus repeats, do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceeds what? Evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemings. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. This really attacks who you are. It destroys you from within. As we read through chapters 5 through 7, I find it interesting that Solomon targeted 7 challenges of youth. We're just basically going to list these. But a few of them I want us to give a little attention. You know, it's kind of interesting. You always find these groups of 7. We're going to see there's 7 within 7. 7 is a complete number. So what do we find here? First of all, he warns against sexual sin. Let's at least read the first 6 verses of chapter 5, because that introduces us to the rest of them. So it begins, my son, pay attention to my wisdom. This is Solomon, the wisest man on earth, giving counsel to his inexperienced son. Lend your ear to my understanding, that you may perceive discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge. For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey. Oh my. Now he's getting into sexual immorality, which is probably the #1 problem of youth, more than anything else. Because biologically we have those urges, right? For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood. You don't see what the end result is going to be because you're blind. You can't see that. Solomon says, I'm not blind. I see that. Sharp as a 2-edged sword. her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell. You think this is something that might be rather serious? Pretty strong language, wouldn't you say? Lest you ponder her path of life, her ways are unstable, you do not know them. She's going to destroy you because she's immoral. What else did he warn his son about? About getting into debt. I mean, people get into debt because they don't know how to handle money. That's why I believe in putting children on budgets. We put ours on a budget. Help them learn how to handle money. There's warning against laziness. Well, we can understand that. Chapter 6, verses 6 to 11. If you're lazy, you're never going to account for anything. And that means you don't spend all your free time punching around on your iPhone. Wanting to be productive. Warning against laziness. Warning against gossip. Gossip tries to destroy the reputation of other people, but it always ends up destroying the person who shares the gossip. Leave it alone. Warnings against wickedness in general. And there we have what's commonly referred to as the 7 deadly sins. I find it interesting that throughout all this, we find these being more serious than even alcohol and drugs. I would not have thought that, especially with the emphasis we put in our society today and how serious it really is. It's not to diminish the seriousness of these issues. Rather, it enhances what he is talking about. These are more important than that. And then what does he do? He goes back to sexual sins again. He warns against adultery. Verses 20 through 35 of chapter 6. And then of all things, all of chapter 7 of Proverbs is a warning against harlots. Why? Because when we're young, that is really our greatest temptation. God placed those needs in there, but they are supposed to be expressed in marriage. And there's where the problem comes in. So notice that 3 of the 7 have to do with sexual pitfalls. Sexual immorality destroys the very person himself. Now Solomon wants his young man to know that. You know, it's easy for a young lady. She's interested in boys. She wants the attention. She tries to learn what he's interested in so that he'll give her attention and so on. And then she realizes, hey, I'm powerful. You know, she is. She is to a boy who will give himself to her. That's where the wickedness comes into it. Why don't we just take a few minutes to read these verses together? Verse 21 says, with her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him. Immediately he went after her, as an ox goes to the slaughter. Well, he's going to be killed. He's going to be destroyed. Or as a fool to the correction of the stocks. You know what that's referring to. When you, in the public square, people have done wrong, they're put in stocks. They haven't learned their lesson. Well, put me back in the stocks again. Who would ever want to say something like that? Now look at verse 23. I have it highlighted for you. It says, till an arrow struck his liver. as a bird hastens to the snare. He did not know it would cost him his life. As the arrow strikes his liver, you've got to understand a little bit of the background of ancient thought. You know, when a person was dying or they're trying to operate on a person and they open them up, they could see the various organs of the body. They could see the heart that's pumping blood, and they could see the lungs. They had an idea it had something to do with the air and that type of thing. And they knew the stomach digested food and the purpose of the intestines. But what is the liver for? After all, it's only the second largest organ in the body, second to the lungs. And here it sits, a little bit to your right side, in the middle of your belly. What's the liver for? Well, we call it the liver. What do you think they would call it? The liver. Because they didn't know what it was. They couldn't figure it out. They knew when you pierced it. They knew when you cut the ducts from it. This awful smelling bile came out and so on. They knew that when you're emotionally hurt and so on, you got hurting in your stomach, especially if you're grieving. And so they thought the liver was the very center of life. Of course, they were looking, like many today, for a physical, materialistic view of man. And so right there is where life is. Life is in the liver. We know better than that. We know it has to do with our digestion and the absorption of fats and so on. But they didn't know any better. So he says, she struck him with an arrow in the very center of his life, is what this is saying here. He says, now, verse 24, now therefore listen to me, my children, pay attention to the words of my mouth. Listen up. How many times does Solomon say to his son, now listen, 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 listen. How many times have you tried to say that to your children? Listen, listen, listen. Why do they say that to you? They don't want you to be destroyed. They don't want you to be damaged for the rest of your life. Listen. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Please, my son, do not stray into her paths, for she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. God gave her power, didn't he? Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. Can you imagine any stronger language that the wise man could have used than this? And he's saying to his son, listen up. Young people, how do you want to see your future spouse see you? You just want to see it physically attractive? Do you want them to use you as a piece of meat? Or do you want them to value you as a person and love you for who you are because your heart is good? It has not been destroyed by evil. This is very straightforward. It needs to be considered very carefully. The pulpit commentary, as it comments on Proverbs 7:23, has summarized the effects of sexual immorality upon its victim. It says, the youth follows the harlot till his liver. I think it's interesting, though, in other places, the New King James puts in heart. They left it here in Proverbs. 4:23. I mean, in Proverbs 7:23. He says, till his liver, the seat of the passions, is thoroughly inflamed, or till fatal consequences ensue. These are warnings. Where else are you going to find these warnings, this type of insight into your life? You think you're going to find them from your peers at school who are trying to get you to do what they already know is not right, but they think it's so clever that they can get away with it? Do you think your teachers are going to teach you this? One of the things that teachers nowadays want to do is get as far from morality and talking about morality as they can. You're not going to push your morality upon me. You think your politicians are going to teach you? You think your state governments or your federal governments are going to teach you? They're going to be swayed by what's politically correct, and that's not always right. Where are you going to get it? You're going to get it from God's Word, and hopefully from godly parents who will help you with this. So your life is not forever damaged or even destroyed. Man, when I was growing up, we rarely even heard about suicide. But it would happen. All results in people feeling badly about themselves. You see, violations of the liver leaves a person broken. Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, which he laments over the fall of Jerusalem, talks about the people. What he has to say about the people also apply to individuals as well. It reads, and this is in the King James, beginning with verse 2 of Lamentations, verse 10 of Lamentations 2. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit upon the ground and keep silence. They have cast up dust upon their heads. They have girded themselves with sackcloth. The virgins of Jerusalem hang down their heads to the ground. What does that describe for you? Sorrow, loss, even the virgins. What's left for me? My eyes do fail with tears. My bowels are troubled. Isn't that kind of interesting? In the New Testament, the word is philogna. Sounds kind of messy, but it's talking about your guts, right? If you see something that is very wicked, or somebody suffering, or something like that, or you suffer a loss yourself, you get that feeling in your stomach, in your bowels. Once again, that's why they thought, well, that must be what the liver's for. Okay? And so my bowels are troubled, my liver, there you have it again, my life, you can say, is poured upon the earth for the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and the sucklings swoon in the streets of the city. Did Israel really see this coming upon them? No. But then again, they did not have wise men to lead them. And when they did try to lead them, they did not listen to them. Now they're suffering the consequences. What is all this about? It's about our hearts, isn't it? We don't want anybody or anything destroying our hearts, who we really are. And so just before he goes into those 7 areas of warnings for his son, chapters 5 through 7, he has this to say in chapter 4 and verse 23. He's saying to his son, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. That defines who you are. You do not want to destroy that. You do not want to even damage it. And it will be damaged by sin, because sin always leaves scars. We don't get away with anything. But Rehoboam, Solomon's son, did not protect his heart because his father did not protect his heart. This is what I find, this is the most amazing thing about the entire study of Proverbs. Look at 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. This is our last scripture. But King Solomon loved many foreign women. They were his downfall. As well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and the Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts from after their gods. And Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. You know, I look at this and I look at, well, possibly Proverbs was written for the benefit of Rehoboam. Solomon had quite a few children, but Rehoboam was the one that followed him on the throne, right? And so here he's trying to protect his own son from being destroyed, especially from immoral women. And lo and behold, what happened? He didn't protect his own heart, did he? And when he did not protect his own heart, of what value was he to his children? A lot of the troubles we experience in life, a lot of the troubles we experience in our families are our own doing. Because we thought we could get away with certain things. And we don't get away with anything. Even David, he thought nobody would know. But God knew. What's the condition of your heart this morning? Is it getting harder and harder, or has it already become hard? More importantly, what are you going to do about it? It doesn't matter who we are, how righteous or how self-righteous we may think we are. Everybody has a responsibility of protecting his heart. That's making sure of what we put in there, how it's being developed. Because out of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's how I know what's in your heart. This is for the admonition of the church. I've pointed out young people only because they're inexperienced. But there are adults too who are experienced and they know better. And they will still choose what is wrong. In either case, we need to repent. We need to turn away from it. It's wrong. I'm determined not to go that way anymore. And please, Lord, I pray to you that you will forgive me and help me to overcome. Are you willing to do that? How do you stand before your God this morning? How will you answer? Let's together to sing this.
Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, that calls me from a world of care, and bids me at my Father's throne, make all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief, and oft escaped the tempter's snare. By thy return, sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, the joy I feel, the bliss I share, of those whose anxious spirits burn with strong desires for thy return, with